From the Roundhouse at Expo 86,
Misha and Dianne are watching week 94 of Santa Barbara.
Welcome to week 94 of Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara.
Hello.
Before we get into the Monday episode, let's talk a bit about the far future of the year 2022. We spotted Charles Bateman in an episode of Canon. We started watching Canon on Tuesday nights, and in the first episode of the first season, which is the second one shot after the pilot, he had a bit of an accent, and I didn't actually recognize him in the scene until I saw him in the credits, and had to rewind. It was obviously him. So.
And of course he also had dark hair at that time, and he's wearing this sort of policeman's outfit. So, yeah, and I think he had some sort of sunglasses on for a lot of it too. So
sort of Paul Burke style sunglasses.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of funny that we didn't spot him until the credits. And then just before we recorded, we continued our marathon of Space Academy. And in addition to Ty Henderson, the usual character, special guest star was Dina Dietrich, of course, Katie Wallace from Santa Barbara, and directed by Jeffrey Hayden, who I believe we previously identified as the director of the pilot of Santa Barbara. So.
And we saw a much more recent guest star on the show, who also is on Santa Barbara.
Oh yes, on Days of Our Lives, Gina Gallegos showed up unexpectedly as a judge. She, of course, had previously been on the show in 2010 as a prison warden in episodes that also starred Robin Mattson. So that was a fun pairing back then. This time seems to be on her own behind a judge's desk. Can't imagine how many episodes this custody hearing can possibly be, but it looks like it's at least going to drag into a second episode. So nice to see her again. Yep. Back in 1980, what year are we in? Six. Well, it was Mother's Day yesterday. And today is May 12th, 1986, and I would have, of course, been at my job at the Math Assistance Center at Okanagan College, and that job was basically me and two others, basically being there 8 hours a day while the center was open, and just administering tests for people who are entering the university who need their math tests, or the college at that time. So it was just, watching them while they did the test, and I think we marked them too. And then there was one other employee there whose job it was to work on some calculus manuals for our boss, Doug. So she spent the most of the summer cutting out little letter set letters and numbers and symbols, because that was the only way you could get a derivative symbol and a what's the other thing? Boy, it's been 35 years. Especially with the C, I think. Boy. Anyway, that will be an ongoing thing that we will in fact end up assisting with. But the exciting thing about the Math Assistance Center, aside from our boss not being around most of the day, was that it had a television, because there were some instructional videos that were on VHS tapes. And so, in theory, we could watch shows if no one was around. And of course, it was kind of a random drop-in type place. And of course, without cable, you only get 2 channels in Canada, CBC and CTV, but CTV was showing Another World at 1 o'clock. So I could have, in theory, watched some episodes of Another World. Of course, I think The Real World was slightly different, because people are always walking in, especially since lunch hour ended at 1 and we reopened the doors at 1. There was often a customer. So it's hard to guess whether I audio recorded Santa Barbara or another world over the summer. Maybe we'll get an interview with one of my friends on how their summer jobs at Expo went. It's episode 455 of Santa Barbara, and Mason puts on a weak Irish accent. By weak, I mean it was so understated, he sounded exactly like Mason, and I don't know why Mary didn't recognize him.
I didn't even catch his Irish accent, to be honest with you.
I think he was underplaying it a little too much, considering he wasn't Lane Davies with an Irish accent, but he was Mason with an Irish accent, trying to disguise his voice. Mary confesses to him about having impure thoughts, and that also throws in that she has never slept with Mark, just in case it wasn't 100% clear from the documents Mason stole from the doctor's office. Mason leaves the confessional, I guess, because he's kind of embarrassed by the entire thing. And Mary's confused when the priest side of it is suddenly empty, and when she comes out, a different priest walks into the room. And then she checks with Mother Isabel, and she confirms there are only 2 priests currently at the convent. So Mary is suspicious about this mystery 3rd priest. Throughout the day, of course, Mason continues to work on his chalk drawing of his life with Mary, and draws the 2 of them on horseback, which he is just finishing up when Mary walks in and folds her arms. So I believe she will confront Mason about just being disguised as a priest in the next episode.
I think we have discussed all through this little storyline of Mason at the convent that it is a bit odd for a lawyer to have so much time on his hands that he can spend time at a convent sketching drawings.
Yeah, shouldn't he be at an oyster bar being a lawyer? Do you think this will be an unforgivable sin to Mary to dress as a priest?
Well, you know, Mary's first move is always to get a bit self-righteous and offended by things, so I'm sure she will not disappoint us this time.
So put them off the path for a few days.
Yeah.
A man enters room 830 of the Capwell Hotel. We thought it was going to be that woman that we thought David was having an affair with, and clearly Julia was surprised too, but he kind of had the look of a private eye the minute he came in. I mean, he had like a gun holster when he took his jacket off or when he put it on. So Julia hears him on the phone with David, asking whether David has the money. And then later at the Orient Express, Julia watches David hand over an envelope full of cash in exchange for the photos of David with the brunette that we saw Julia find last episode. She confronts David and insists that those photos were fakes, and that he was only paying off Whitmore to, put an end to the, potential scandal. So once again, we find Julia, or David, acting in a completely suspicious way. It would be so weird if he actually is the killer, and, this is actually not a murder mystery storyline, but a Julia makes bad decisions storyline.
Yeah, I mean, either way, I think that's going to be a component of the storyline, because David is so sketchy.
Yeah.
And he has always been sketchy. And it's just, I can kind of see in a way why Pearl is so annoyed that she threw over his case to take David. And, all Pearl's done is not being hugely forthcoming about his real identity, which really, when you think about it, there's a lot of reasons why a person may not be. But in every other way, he's been pretty straight up with Julia. And David has lied about everything. And I feel like he will continue to lie about everything.
Yeah, you wonder, he thinks Julia's going to drop him after finding this out, and she says she's definitely thinking about it. But the next thing you wonder how David's going to get out of it. She's brought Nick with her, and Nick apparently confirms that he's examined the photos, and they're definitely fakes. So we find David was telling the truth about that. She and Nick confront Whitmore, and Whitmore says, "Oh yeah, I was a private investigator. I was hired by Madeline to prove that David was cheating on her, and I'm sure he was, but I couldn't get the photos. So I had these doctored up, and I was going to give them to her, but then she died. So I thought, well, but she owed me so much money by that point. I thought I would blackmail David for the the amount of fake photos. And he said, but I'm sure he really is having an affair. So that's still an ongoing thing then.
Yeah.
Julia gets him to give back the money, which I don't know. I mean, considering if Madeline did owe him all that money,
Yeah,
he should be paid.
feel like
But she returns it to David and says that, he says, well, are you sticking with me? And she says, I'm not going to walk out on you. And it's like, are you talking about as a lawyer or as a potential girlfriend? I think Julia's thinking both.
And when we think about it, of course, it's always a little confusing, but in the timeline of this show, it's been, what, a week or so since Madeline was killed? So it probably hasn't been as long as it has been for us.
Yeah. I almost thought we were going to see a scene at the end where David meets up with Whitmore again and says she bought it. That the whole thing was a setup by David and that he purposely faked the photos so that Julia would believe him. But it's just so convoluted. And yet, other than this brief knowledge that Lionel also knew Madeline, there's really no other suspects yet.
There's just always so much drama with David, though, isn't there?
Yeah. Literally every scene is a red flag.
Yeah, and Julia just always seems surprised. Every time.
And then he manages to get out of it somehow. In a way that's maybe not 100% believable. Like with this, my thought that Whitmore is in on it.
Yeah.
You might remember Santana and Kirk were listening to the hidden microphone in the cabana.
Yeah.
And the tape of Eden and Cruz's conversation ends. And Cruz really has no choice but to keep it going so as not to put Kirk suspicious. So he joins in on Eden's sexy talk, which of course is mortifying Santana, who neither of them realize is listening. And he eventually gets them out of the room by saying, oh, we should go for a walk together. And Eden can't really, say no to that. So he is very upset, once again, at what Eden's done, and makes her promise to head out of town immediately. This is like the third time she's promised that. And she agrees after a very brief stop at the Orient Express.
Now, I cannot believe that Eden would really be that upset that Santana overheard this conversation. Not that I think that played any role in her plans, but just thinking about it, I don't think she would actually be that upset. But if Cruz is in trouble with Santana, I kind of feel like he has himself to blame. He's been at Eden's beck and call this entire time.
He could probably just tell Santana, we suspect Kirk of being able to try to kill Eden, but don't tell anyone, because that would smooth over a large percentage of these interactions with Eden. Santana wants to be taken home, but Kirk wants to talk to her first, so takes her to the Orient Express and wants to know what she plans to do. And she says she's not leaving Cruz and would rather just not have found out. And, you should be happy that I'm not going to leave Cruz, right?
Exactly.
So, because that keeps Eden away from him in some way. And she just asks Kirk to leave her alone. But before she stalks off, Cruz manages to spot them, and he is suspicious as to why Kirk and Santana are together at this exact moment when, just half an hour ago, Kirk was listening in on a conversation between him and Eden. So I wonder if he suspects, is there a chance Santana might have been with him, or has he told Santana that? How would that benefit him, So, yeah, I don't know. I think either Santana's going to blow up at Cruz, or Cruz might need to tell Santana because he sees that maybe she already knows something.
I think the smart thing would be for Cruz to tell Santana that this is part of a case and lay it out for her. Whether she would entirely believe him or not is another matter. I kind of agree with Santana about Kirk's motives, and this is something we've talked about in relation to Gina as well, how he would be well served to just let her kind of roll on with her amnesia story. And I think Santana's right. Why would he want to come between her and Cruz? Yeah,
it seems he's trying to interrupt two series of events that actually are both working in his favor.
Yeah.
Gina convinces her guard to let her have lunch with Haley. We see she has a guard, and there's two, suited people as well. So they must be district attorney people, and they're all discussing whether Gina should remain isolated in the room or whether they should allow her up to the Orient Express. But she and Haley end up having lunch up there with the guard watching them. But Eden has a plan. She gets the maitre d' to have the guard called away briefly, gets Ted to distract Haley, and then she whisks Gina out of the Orient Express. And, to avoid Kirk, who's also looking for them, Eden says, let's take the private presidential suite elevator, which is at the back of that 8th floor hallway we always see, and to the left. So next to, or at least closer to, this room 830, where all of Julia's adventures have been happening in this last episode or so. So I don't know if we knew there was a private elevator back there. I think maybe it has been mentioned once before. I think Cece came from that direction once. But then again, they're almost like for when there's a fire, there's almost an indication that maybe that whole upper area has a rectangular hallway that goes all the way around the building. We've only ever seen one side and an intimation of a second side when they were escaping from the fire. But it may just be a square.
Yeah.
Or rectangle. Gina is taken to the boathouse by Eden, where Eden either hopes to get her to confess that she's pretending to have amnesia or get to jog her memory. So she talks about, did you remember trying to kill me and saying someone was after us and stuff like that. But, Gina continues to fake the amnesia. And then Eden starts in with Brandon as a new tactic. And she says, I will make sure that you have Brandon permanently. Before Gina can respond, they hear a noise and they hide. And Cruz comes barging into the boathouse looking for them. He suspects, of course, that's where Eden would take Gina, which makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really want to see if Gina's given the right, inducement, whether she will come clean about the amnesia.
Yeah, and whether she'll mention the problem with Kirk. I don't know. I just feel like we've still got a bit more of the sweeps to go.
Yeah, that's right. We're only at the beginning of May.
Drawn out a bit more before we move on to something else.
The thing is, Eden just keeps saying, tell me the name of the man, tell me the name of the man. If she just said, is it Kirk? That may jog enough, that may be enough indication to Gina that, okay, Kirk is not, above suspicion, so maybe they'll believe my story. Kelly tells Nick that she had been having hallucinations these last few weeks, and that is why she stabbed Dylan. Of course, she wants to get back together, and he says, I don't know. I was terribly hurt, and he says, I want to sort out my feelings. So this is I watch this scene now as a 55-year-old, thinking, good idea, Nick. Sharp contrast to the 19-year-old that originally saw it. That thought, what the hell are you doing?
I watched this from the point of view of a plot point, and I thought, that delay in him declaring his feelings is going to give an opportunity for Dylan to pop in at some point and completely disrupt everything.
She says, I will never hurt you again. She goes out to get some food, and we see Justin making more recordings about his patient, which I expect Kelly to find at some point. But he says into the microphone that Dylan's erratic behavior is a threat to Kelly. Kelly returns with the dinner, and Nick returns and asks Kelly on a date. And Justin seems worried. Now, the first thing I thought is, is he falling in love with Kelly too? Because that is what happens.
That's what everyone does.
But then his last lines before were, Dylan's erratic behavior is a threat to Kelly. Is he worried that just Nick and Kelly being back together will put Dylan over the edge and get him to start doing crazy things again? So I think both are a possibility. Definitely the Dylan thing he's worried about, but, could be falling for Kelly.
I feel, coming to a head with Nick, Kelly, and Dylan, one way or another, whether they're
during these May sweeps.
Yeah, in the smoldering ruins of the casino, or, on top of the Capitol Hotel or something. They're coming to a head.
Yeah, they're down to one ferry. I mean, that's in this casino is maybe the second ferry will go down with Dylan aboard or something. That's it for our episode. This week is sponsored by the Shineheart Wig Company. Not poisoning rivers since 1997. I thought I would use this mug first because it's starting to get worn out by the dishwasher. This, of course, is a reference to 30 Rock, and I purchased this in New York, one of our visits at the NBC store. Is it called the NBC Experience Store, or am I making that up? Anyway, this was one of the few interesting things they had there. I also picked up an extremely cheaply made Dunder Mifflin umbrella there that fell apart the first time. Not the first time I used it. The first time I opened it, it fell into pieces. I will demonstrate that to you at some point when we do our next NBC-related mug, because I will compare it to an almost identical looking umbrella that I bought in the 90s at the NBC store in LA that I still use. So somehow they've switched manufacturers to a very poor one.
You did, however, get a quality Seinfeld shirt.
Yes, that's true. And I think that one NBC shirt with all the logos, too, we got on that trip, right? So
they do have some
I did buy a
decent
lot.
merchandise.
And I went and bought some NBC wrapping paper, too, that I'm still showing up in people's birthdays gifts. So, I've run out of hats to wear whenever I wear the Santa Barbara shirt, so I'm going to start going through my massive mug collection every week, just to make it easier to tell the episodes apart when I'm wearing the same shirt every time. We will return for episode 456 of Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara. See you then.
Bye-bye.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We finished episode 456 of Santa Barbara, which originally aired Tuesday, May 13th, 1986. And in all the excitement over Expo, we forgot to mention the exciting season finale of Remington Steele on May 10th. Season 4, episode 22, Bonds of Steel. To avoid being deported, Remington Steele married Laura Holt. So that would make for a good series finale if the show doesn't get renewed, and we'll find out in 2 days on May 15th if there will be a 5th season of Remington Steele. And we've got a few more season finales coming up in the next week or so, and we'll talk about them as they happen.
Now, we have had more sightings in our TV watching since that time as well.
We watched a movie called It's in the Bag, and Rudy Valley was in that, who, of course, played Minx's boyfriend when they had Christmas dinner in the jail cell last year, or 2 years ago now. Who else did we see? We saw
Judith McConnell.
That's right. Judy McConnell was credited in, was it Canon? We watched the second episode of Canon. And I think that was it, right? That's about it for sightings.
I think so, yeah.
All right. Back in 1986, Mary covers for Mason when Mother Isabel comes in and says there's someone posing as a priest around here, and talks her out of calling the police. Say, it's probably just a seminary student. Mary continues to work on the chalk drawing while Mason watches from behind a pillar. At one point, realizing that Mason is once again hiding in the confessional, Mary goes in there. She kind of stands next to it and starts talking to Mason, who does not realize she knows it's him. And she says that all she can think about is Mason. And she counts off all of her sins. She counts off all of his sins. She says he's pretty much covered them all except for gluttony. And then she remembers he's an alcoholic and says, yeah, let's check off gluttony as well. Mason asks her if she loves the man. And Mary says, in my heart I do, but what good is love if I can't trust him? And Mason asks if she's considered marriage to the man. And she says that he just goes from woman to woman. And then Mother Isabel interrupts, saying there's a phone call from Mark. So Mary tells Mother Isabel, but I don't think Mason overhears, that she's planning to end her marriage to Mark.
Mm-hmm.
So this is interesting that she's... with the way she was talking about not being able to trust him, I guess she's hinting that he should reveal himself. But I think he still thinks that might be unwise at this time. Mark meets with Sophia at the Orient Express, and she has cancelled her procedure, expressing her fear that the lumpectomy will turn into a mastectomy. And Rick is actually watching this, and when Mark leaves, he goes to Sophia and says that she looked very worried when talking to Dr. McCormick. And so she tells him about her breast cancer and that she doesn't know if she'll have the surgery. She says her mother had the same thing, and she recalled watching her mother turn into someone that she didn't know. But Rick asks, how are they supposed to make up for lost time if she's not going to stick around? So it looks like this may just be sort of a way to store a little, hopefully, short storyline to get Rick and Sophia in each other's orbit and start that storyline of them, becoming mother and son.
Yeah, I think they're definitely getting closer and closer. This will be another thing that cements their bond a bit. And now with Warren out of the picture for a while, we won't be having that rivalry to kind of distract us from Rick's relationship with his mom.
And with Amy being removed from the cast, presumably they're going to focus on the Brick-Sophia relationship for a while, story-wise. Cruz comes home to the beach house, and Santana is so upset with him that she runs out.
Yeah.
She runs into Mark at the Orient Express and asks how Mary is, and Mark says she's great. Santana sits with Kirk and tells him she nearly told Cruz what she overheard in the cabana. And Kirk starts ordering drinks for some reason. Kirk's logic is kind of goofy lately. He doesn't want Santana to tell anyone, yet he's trying to get her more drunk, which is going to make it more likely that she'll spill the beans. But the end result is that Santana starts to dance wildly on the dance floor. And Kirk says that his heart can't take her sensual dancing. But Mark, who's been watching, says that he'll take over. He seems very enamored by Santana's wild dance. And Kirk is very angry with this and breaks them up. And Mark says, what are you, her father? At the boathouse, Eden begs Gina to tell her what she remembers. Do it for Brandon, she says. So Gina pretends to remember some vague memories of Cece being very angry with her. And then Gina asks to get taken back to the hotel. Eden tells Cruz, that she thinks Gina's coming around a little to her. And I'm not sure if I misinterpreted this, but it looks like Gina removes the fake bruise from her forehead that she had put on there. I don't know why she does that still at the boathouse rather than back at the Orient Express, because she, Eden will kind of notice it's missing right away, whereas maybe if she does it there and then it's gone the next day, people won't think it's so weird. At the Orient Express, Santana tells Eden she overheard her with Cruz at the cabana. And Eden can't explain because just at that moment Kirk shows up. So Eden rushes off, and Santana tells Kirk that Eden didn't even deny it. So I think we may have, a little while longer of Santana believing this. Mark, who's still hanging out there and struck out with Santana, spots a prostitute at the bar and decides that's just what he needs. And has a successful encounter with her. So he subsequently places that phone call to Mary that we heard Mary answering earlier, and is very excited that Mary's coming home in a few days because he wants to show off his newly recovered skills. she does not mention that she's planning to divorce him in
No.
that phone call. So I think Mark will be dreadfully disappointed in a few days. I don't know why Mary isn't coming home right away.
Mm-hmm.
I can only assume that as they're plotting out their sweeps week, they probably are going to focus on maybe Cruz and Eden, or sorry, Kirk and Eden, or maybe Dylan and Callie at a certain time in May, and so they couldn't slot in Mary and Mark this week, so that they've pushed it off to next week.
Now, the one thing that did concern me a little bit about this, and it's all sort of played quite lightly in this episode, with the whole flirtation between Mary and Mason, and the back and forth on the phone, sort of the timing and everything. But it did concern me a little bit because now that Mark has his skills back, he could consummate his marriage to Mary, and he could do it by force. Even. We've seen that side of him, and so that did concern me a little bit, that there may be a situation come up where she can't get it annulled for not being consummated.
I guess we'll have to wait till next week to see how things go.
Mm-hmm.
At the hotel, Eden tells Cruz that Gina was starting to feel safe with her. Cruz says it's not safe for Eden to be there with her at all. And Eden says, well, let me talk to her one more time. And he says, okay, but keep Brandon out of it. I'm not sure why. He wants to keep Brandon out of it, because that's a really good leverage point. Gina pretends to remember having the gun and that someone else was there in the boathouse, but it was too dark. Cruz is actually in the room at this point, talking to Gina. I can't remember if Eden and Cruz are both there, but Gina suddenly says, hey, I remember this. This is a two-way mirror. Have you been spying on me? So I think we couldn't quite remember if Gina knew that was a two-way mirror, but we saw an episode a few days ago where she looked in the mirror and suddenly, changed her course. So we thought, well, if she does remember the mirror, then this is the point when she'll realize Cruz is watching her the whole time. Cruz says, well, I couldn't really take any chances. So, next thing we know, Cruz is taking Gina into some kind of wine cellar to hide her out there. So she'll no longer be at the Capitol Hotel now. I don't know if that was they came down some stairs, so I don't know if that's the Lockridge wine cellar, or if that's Kirk's winery, or if that's the Capitol Hotel wine cellar, or some other wine cellar that Cruz has found. But Eden seems to know about it, because she shows up. While Gina's in the bathroom, Eden arrives and tells Cruz that Santana was listening this morning at the cabana, and Cruz suspects Kirk took her out there. So, I don't know, it's kind of a dingier place for Gina to hang out than the Capitol Hotel. Maybe Cruz thinks that she'll be more likely to spill things if rather than face many weeks stuck in the wine cellar. So Cruz quickly returns home to tell Santana that what she heard was a tape that they had made to trap Kirk, because he's probably the one that tried to kill Eden. But Santana is actually so angry she doesn't really believe Cruz. She says, are you going to make more tapes? And Cruz says, no, but you can't tell Kirk about any of this. And Santana says, give me one good reason, which is bizarre, because she could overturn this entire investigation. She runs off, but he stops her and says that she must know that he'd never deliberately hurt her. So hopefully Cruz keeps her from spilling the beans to Kirk and ruining the entire operation.
Yeah, the only thing I could think of about that was that perhaps she doesn't really realize or doesn't really believe that it is an investigation that actually required him to pretend to be Eden's lover. I mean, that is a bit far-fetched. Or that maybe she's just so fed up with his continual investigations involving Eden that she doesn't really care if it's true or not. And perhaps at this point, Kirk has shown her more attention lately than Cruz.
Next, we see Eden leaving a note for Cece in the atrium, because once again, Eden's leaving town, as she has 2 times before already, and not actually left. Kirk arrives and asks, "Where are you going? On a romantic getaway that Cruz has planned for you on a train?" Anyway, this argument escalates, and Kirk ends up putting his hands around her throat and says, "I didn't recover from a heart operation so that you could leave me." He clutches his chest, and Eden takes the opportunity to run out, and Kirk calls after her, "You're mine, Eden." So this chest clutching of Kirk's has happened quite often since his heart transplant. So this may end up being the out for the whole storyline. And even if Santana does spill the beans to Kirk, but it might end up being the way that that Gina ends up, in the clear for everything. Because if Kirk dies, she can just blame everything on him. Yeah. And that is the end of episode 456. And we had some closing credits today, and it is the same cast as last week, as we had in episode 452. So the only additional thing, the boat, of course, was credited, the luxury liner that is in the boathouse that we can barely even see anymore. But Santana's dance was choreographed by someone whose name I didn't type in, so you can check that yourself. So the sensuous dance of Santana's that seemed so somewhat out of place in the episode actually had been choreographed, and obviously was a big thing on the show that week for them to do. So. And it helped cure Mark McCormick. Okay, well that's it for a Tuesday episode. We've got Wednesday, May the 14th coming up. And we will talk to you again after we watch episode 457. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Rembrandt von Capwell.
It's like Michelangelo being torn from his ceiling. It may not be the Sistine, but it is a chapel. It's a shame I can't grant myself absolution. Heaven knows I'm dressed for the occasion.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We finished episode 457 of Santa Barbara, the 201st episode of the season. Yesterday we forgot to mention it was number 200. I'm counting my seasons starting on July 30th, so that's probably non-standard. They probably start sometime in September, but that's how I'm counting them. Last night we had the season finale of Moonlighting, season 2, and there wasn't really a cliffhanger. Only 18 episodes in this season, so I think this show takes a lot longer to film than most normal ones, I think. Otherwise they'd have a full, 22 or 24. Back in May 14th, 1986, Santana agrees to keep Cruz and Eden's secret from Kirk. She takes Brandon over to see Rosa, and she runs into Kirk and tells him that Cruz didn't deny the affair. So she is helping now Cruz and Eden with their deception. She then gets upset later when she sees Kirk and Brandon chatting together and takes Brandon home. I think Kirk may have suspected something when she freaked out seeing him with Brandon. So I don't know if Kirk is onto something now. Later, Santana does say to Cruz, "Oh, I almost told him." Cruz visits Cece to tell him the truth about Kirk. And, of course, Cece is shocked by the whole thing. Cruz tells him not to let Kirk know they're onto him. So now both Cece and Santana could accidentally spill it at any point. Cece quickly comes up with a plan. He says, "I can convince Gina to spill the beans by promising her Brandon." And so Cruz takes Cece down to the wine cellar where Gina is being kept. And while interrogating Gina as she continues to fake her amnesia, he manages to get her to trick her into saying something that she wouldn't know without a memory. And she covers by saying, "Well, I don't remember the exact incidents, but I just have a feeling." So Cece pulls out a paper he's had drawn up, giving her full custody of Brandon if she exposes her accomplice. And Gina is very uneasy with the word accomplice because she keeps iterating that I was a victim.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this may be problematic for Gina if she signs that.
I think, though, if it does go ahead somehow in that direction, obviously it's going to be very problematic for Santana. And very problematic for Santana and Cruz that it would seem that Cruz and Cece have come up with this plan that really takes away the one thing she cares about, all to save Eden, who she doesn't care about. So.
Mm-hmm. Cruz did mention to Cece earlier he had no intention of leaving Santana, but I don't think Brandon being taken away was part of that, picture. Cece insists to Cruz it's a fake out, that he has a way of avoiding, living up to his promise. Gina calls Kirk and tells him that she's decided she's going to tell the police what she knows tomorrow. If I were you, I'd make a reservation for somewhere distant. So, this makes me wonder if Gina is going to be in peril for the next 24 hours as Kirk tries to find her and possibly silence her.
Definitely, although I wouldn't be surprising to me if Gina's informing Kirk seems like a really bad idea. But she's always got a few other cards up her sleeve, and maybe she's even seen this as a potential extension of her blackmail activities.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I just don't know how much money Kirk has.
Yeah.
The well seems to have run dry a couple of times recently. So, if she could confirm that he'd set her up with a house somewhere far away and got Brandon, then maybe she could get away with it. But it seems like she couldn't get Brandon without first turning in Kirk, so it would be a tough sell. Well, we'll see what happens. 24 hours, that could be very soon, depending on how slowly the days are moving this week.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be at least one more episode that takes place today, based on what the Kelly storyline. Mary confronts Mason as he works on his chalk drawing. I was almost finished, he says. It may not be the Sistine, but it is the chapel. Mason tells her he heard that she is going back to Mark. And she tells him he heard wrong, and that she is leaving Mark. Somehow Mason has arranged for a white horse on the lawn of the convent, and he takes Mary out and puts her on the horse, Mother Isabel witnessing this whole bizarre thing. And Mary says, Mother Isabel, I'm not sure I can pass up an exit like this. And apparently stopping for a quick phone call, Mason makes some arrangements and leads Mary on her horse to some tents he has hastily had set up, which contain, among other things, a gramophone and a bed, and some desert clothes for them to change into to complete the Lawrence of Arabia vibe, I guess.
It has to be said, these tents have the same quality as Doctor Who's TARDIS, in that they're much, much larger on the inside than they are on the outside.
They seem kind of roomy, even if you don't count the cameramen that are obviously wandering around in half of it. Anyway, they get into their desert clothes and make out on the bed. That is how we left them. Oh, she does say she can't cheat on Mark or something like that at one point, but I don't know if that was this episode. But they're content to make out on the bed.
Having done a certain amount of event planning myself, I can say that it would actually, I guess the convent is a fair distance from where these tents are set up, because just setting up the tents would have taken quite a period of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mason does walk the horse, so maybe they walk for miles. You'd think they both have sunburns. Kelly tells Nick she owes Dylan an explanation. Now that she knows exactly what was wrong with her in these last few months. Sam visits Dylan, who's now using a cane, due to the extensive damage caused to his leg by Kelly stabbing him. He says he's in constant pain. He tells Sam that Kelly probably stabbed him in a last-ditch effort to deny her feelings for him. Sam quickly gives Nick a heads up that Dylan is still nuts. Nick tries to reach Kelly to tell her not to visit Dylan in his current state, but he is too late, so he goes to intercept her at his door instead. And she says, well, you can stay outside while I go talk to Dylan. Mm-hmm. So that's a wise thing, I think, to have a backup outside. Dylan is very excited to see Kelly, as he had said to Sam all day, oh, I'm expecting a visitor. I guess she had called him earlier to say she was going to see him.
Or he's just nuts and he's always expecting her.
He's wearing that red and white sweater that we thought looked kind of dopey.
He's also starting to look more and more like the Wolfman because his beard's grown out a little bit. And this is the time in the 80s when hair is starting to get really big, so he's got this big sort of feathery hair.
Kelly asks him about his cane, and he says, oh, I'll be as good as new in a day or two. So he's completely lying to her about the agony that he's in and the permanent tendon damage that he just told Sam about. Kelly tells him all about Joe and Peter and all that stuff that Justin helped her figure out. Dylan says that Nick has put this crazy story in her head and that she's really loved him since Santa Rosa. When she disagrees, he quickly turns around and says, you cut me and I'll never be the same again. So he's, went from saying it was nothing to that he's crippled for life, which seems to be the truth. Kelly says that she's not responsible for his life anymore and leaves. I don't know if Dylan will leave it at that.
I suspect not. I suspect he'll hobble out of there with some sort of devious plan to get her back.
Kelly and Nick discuss Dylan at the Orient Express, and then Nick surprises Kelly with a room key. He has reserved room 716 at the Capwell Hotel for them to spend the night together. Later, we see one of the staff with her in a room that I don't think is 716 because she orders Dom Perignon and caviar for their date later. And then we see part of the scene through the two-way mirror. So she is in the presidential suite. So she has actually booked herself the presidential suite to get changed for her date in room 716, one floor below later, that her much less wealthy boyfriend has booked.
All this time I was trying to remember which room Peter Flint murdered that prostitute in.
Well, I think it was one room below the presidential suite. So, but I can't remember what number the presidential suite is, because we know the one next to it that Julia and David were in last week was 830. But if it is a circle around the whole hotel, then it could be 801 is presidential, and when you get all the way around, 830 is the last one. But I think it's like 814 or something. That sort of rings a bell. But anyway, it's proximal to where she is getting changed. Nice to see Peter's two-way mirror again, even if just for a... maybe that shot was just there to tell us she's in the presidential suite and not in the same room. Dylan visits Nick. No, Nick visits Dylan, and Dylan says, I'm going to walk with a limp. Maybe that'll give me the character you said I always lacked. He accuses Nick of sending Kelly over earlier with some kind of psychological bull that he put in her head. Nick says he'll come back when Dylan's sober. Dylan says, what about me? The hero and his girl sail off into the sunset with the sidekick left behind. And he throws his bottle at the door after Nick leaves. So, he's crippled but annoyed. So we'll see if he shows up at the Capwell Hotel just as Nick and Kelly are on their date.
Yeah, I kind of got red flags coming up because, of course, they were going to have this romantic night at Dylan's hotel room, and Kelly says, oh no, I've got something much better planned, and that usually indicates that something much better is something that's going to be hijacked by other people.
Well, you know, this two different room things might come into play, you know, because there's 8, let's say 14 and 7/16. So if Dylan ends up looking for Kelly in the wrong room, you know, there could be some kind of thing. I feel like there must be a reason that they showed us two different rooms. So, yeah, we'll see. Maybe soon. Probably Friday. Friday sounds like a good cliffhanger day. But we've still got a Thursday episode to go through, and maybe we'll see how Kelly and Nick's date goes. Or there could be a whole episode before their date actually starts. So we will see after we watch episode 458 of Santa Barbara. See you.
Bye.
You look fit as a fiddle and
Don't finish that sentence. I'm fine.
fine. You look marvelous.
Well, Augusta, what are you doing out in the daylight?
I have no time for incivility, Cece.
The Shine Hardwig Company welcomes you back to Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara.
Hello.
We finished episode 458, which originally aired Thursday, May 15th, 1986. Ooh, right in the middle of the sweeps. Mary wakes up naked. A lady in tent number 2 named Frida makes them breakfast. So I guess she and Mason had sex.
That's what we're led to believe, anyway. We'll find out.
This actually increases the chances of your previous guess being right. They don't normally like to have virgins raped on soap operas, so this usually leads up to that. You could be right. Mason and Mary spend the day riding around together. Mary talks at the end of the day about going back to the real world, but Mason wants to stay there forever. Gina calls Kirk in the morning and asks when he's leaving the country. He has until noon before her memory returns completely. Haley announces that breakfast is ready, and Cece comes by and grabs Kirk and says, "Nothing like a big breakfast to get your day started. Ask any condemned man." Later, Haley finds Kirk leaving the house with 2 suitcases. He gives Haley a letter for Gina, saying, "Oh, make sure she reads this before the banks close." Gina asks Haley to open it, and inside is a check for $20,000. Of course, Kirk has sneaked back into the house through the servants' entrance and is watching from behind one of the many pillars. Gina immediately realizes it's a trick so that Kirk can follow Haley to Gina's location and tells Haley to tear up the check. Gina phones Cece and tells him come to the wine cellar. She tells him she remembers being forced to live in a dingy hotel and not that beautiful mansion with her son. Cece says, "Perhaps I'm not a nice man." Gina says she remembers a man at the boathouse, so Cece takes her there. And while they're waiting for Chris and Eden to arrive, Gina points to the place where Kirk was hiding and says, "There was a man with a rifle." And Cece still seems to be a bit reticent to believe her, or maybe he wonders what, she'll pull with respect to how much she remembers. But I think she'll probably tell them enough to implicate Kirk, I think. I don't think she'll hide that it's Kirk anymore at this point.
No, and I kind of, one thing that I kind of liked about this exchange is that at one point Gina says to Cece that she doesn't think he was a very nice man and that it wasn't, a good thing to have a young boy staying in a Fleabag hotel with his mother. And that was something that we had actually talked about during that part of the season.
Lionel and Augusta have breakfast at the Orient Express after a night together. Lionel wants it to be permanent, but Augusta prefers the occasional night together. Augusta gives Lionel a letter from Warren. There was one for every member of the family. And Warren just writes that he's doing well and they'll be able to visit in a few months. So just keeping him in the ether, I guess.
Yes.
Lionel asks how Julia's case is going. Of course, only we know that Lionel had something to do with Julia's case.
Right.
I don't think he gets any useful information out of Augusta.
No.
And then Augusta agrees to have dinner with Lionel after some back and forth bargaining. Augusta visits Cece and says, I have no time for incivility. The casino is a shambles, and I want you to hire Brick back. Cece tells her to do whatever she wants. She calls the Perkins house looking for Brick, and of course, Minx answers, and gives Augusta the number that Brick left in case of emergency. And Augusta is surprised to find out it's the surgery floor of the Santa Barbara Hospital. Brick sits with Sophia in her hospital room. The doctor asks her to sign a release allowing them to do a mastectomy immediately if the cancer has spread. Eventually, she reluctantly agrees. And Brick tells her he understands why she doesn't want Cece or her other children there. He didn't want anyone to see anyone's pity after his accident either. So I remember him when he was trying to get rid of Amy.
When he was paralyzed. Had the shrapnel, I think it was.
Yeah, I can't remember what caused that.
It was his car accident, wasn't it?
Oh, where was it? Santana hit his car or something like that?
I think it was Janice.
Oh, okay. Augusta spots Brick coming out of Sophia's room and enters just to nosily see who he's visiting, and is shocked to find it's Sophia. Then Sophia says, I'm just here for a checkup, but of course Augusta browses through her chart and sees what she's really there for and goes over to hold Sophia's hand. So I thought it was just a really nice
It was a nice,
thing.
tender moment, actually, between these two adversaries who've been battling each other since
The 60s, or the late 50s, perhaps.
Yeah, for decades at this point.
Yeah, I really like that. When Sophia awakens, Brick tells her that Augusta stayed with them for a long time. And the doctor reveals that the surgery went well, and he wants to follow up with radiation. So it's a good news, and I think the point of the storyline was probably to get Brick and Sophia together.
I think so.
With this side benefit of this Augusta thing.
Yeah.
We'll see how long that lasts. Augusta dresses up for her dinner with Lionel, and he says when she's as old as Queen Victoria, he'll still find her attractive. Dylan asks Sam for his gun back. Uh-oh. That's not a good way to start an episode.
No.
Sam declines. This is not something you need, I don't think. Sam later finds his keys missing and realizes that the gun has been taken. Meanwhile, Kelly starts her surprise for Nick, which is a treasure hunt. She hides letters at the boathouse, the Orient Express, and in the Capwell atrium. And she tells Kirk she's going to send a letter to his apartment, and don't open it until 8 p.m. Of course, Dylan is for some reason in Nick's apartment when the letter arrives, and he signs for it and ends up taking it. And while he's there, he also smashes a photo of Kelly. So, somewhat crazed behavior for a suitor of Kelly Capwell during sweeps.
Yeah, and I was thinking, as he was taking off with his letter, that it does sort of show his delusional state of mind. He can't really logically tell himself that she's pursuing him when she has specifically sent a letter to Nick. But he's still going to take it and run with it literally anyway. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see, because I'm assuming by the end of all this there'll be a confrontation with Dylan and Kelly in the Capwell hotel, and it'll be really interesting to see if he's being very violent and vengeful, if he's waving his gun around, or if he's still somehow twisting the situation into some kind of great romance.
Oh, I followed all your clues, Kelly. Yeah, this is actually a cool plot, this thing, because it's like there's a scavenger hunt out there. Kelly's going to be hiding from Nick the whole time because she doesn't want him to see her until the end. No one knows where Kelly is, even though, later Sam and Nick figure out that there is a trail. This is a really actually cool kind of chase with a weird twist to it. So I really like this idea. But Dylan is still in the apartment when Nick comes home, and he hides the letter behind his back, and he's hidden that smashed photo already, somewhat. And he says that Nick ruined his career at the casino.
That was a weird twist, I thought.
Yeah. And Nick says, I don't think I did anything of the sort. But then Dylan says, now I'm going to ruin your career. Picks up some random camera off a shelf that is likely just his childhood camera because it doesn't look super professional, and smashes it.
It was so strange to hear Dylan take that take, because if anyone is supposed to be above having a career, it was supposed to be Dylan.
Well, I guess that's how he's going to get Kelly Capwell, by being a successful businessman. When Nick kicks him out, Dylan's parting shot is, which is another worry that may just be, not just be Kelly who has to worry from Dylan, but maybe now Nick could run afoul of him as well. He follows the clue in the first letter to the boathouse. With all the people going to and from the boathouse today, it's a wonder they didn't run into each other. He follows the next clue to the Capwell atrium. And despite Kirk's best efforts to keep him out, he spots the letter on the mail table and grabs it. Now Kirk had a good reason for trying to keep him out, which we'll find out in a minute. And then Dylan swings by the hospital to get his stitches removed. There he spots Justin, Kelly's neighbor, in a white coat, chatting with another doctor. So now he knows Justin's secrets. So I suspect when he finds Kelly, this is something that he will reveal to her, and that will put a crimp, I think, in Kelly and Justin's relationship.
And possibly Kelly and Nick's as well, because of Nick. Of course, Nick sort of asked Justin to do a little bit of therapy on the side for Kelly.
Sam tells Nick that Dylan stole his gun back. Then Nick finds the smashed photo and the envelope from Kelly, realizing there must have been a letter in it, and I think he rightly assumes that it's sort of a treasure hunt type thing, telling him where to go next. It's quite reasonable because of the conversation they had. So I think they're going to try and find Kelly through other channels, I think.
I was so relieved, actually, when he found this envelope and started to put two and two together, because I had visions of, the next week or so of episodes being Nick sitting in his apartment wondering where his message from Kelly was. I'm glad they got that put together really quickly.
If he phones the Capwell house right now, he won't find anyone there. If he phones the Orient Express, maybe that maitre d' that Kelly gave the letter to for Nick will say, oh, I have a letter here for you. And if Nick smartly says, don't give it to my brother if he shows up, then he could short-circuit the whole thing. Because I assume the next step after the Orient Express is the presidential suite. So Rosa is in, I believe, a small car accident, but she can't come to work, and Haley has to cover the whole house for herself, which Haley says is not a problem. Except that Kirk drugs her milk, and she falls unconscious. Brandon comes downstairs looking for Haley and Rosa, and Kirk tells him, it's just you and I. So, in the middle of dragging Haley's body is when Dylan showed up for that letter. So, that was kind of funny.
We got two crazy men, basically, crossing paths.
Yeah, two of our psycho storylines have intersected briefly. It's interesting that Kirk hates Dylan, so that's kind of funny. Yeah. You're a worse psycho than I am. And the cruiser was furnished by Regal Marine Industries Limited. And when Kelly hid the letter in the boathouse, there was a nice slow pan across the back of that cruiser. I think maybe they felt they hadn't gotten enough, exposure with their expensive prop that they lent Santa Barbara. Only just ever seeing a small corner that I didn't even realize which berth it was in at one point. So, nice job, Regal Marine Industries. And it is Thursday, May 15th, so tonight we will be watching the season finale of Knots Landing and the season finale of Cheers. So tomorrow we'll talk about it, if they had any cliffhangers. I know Knots Landing always does, but is Cheers the kind of show that has cliffhangers? Back in 1986? We will see. And we'll talk about that before we talk about episode 459 of Santa Barbara. See you then.
Bye-bye.
Well, come on, Kurt. Nothing like a big breakfast to get your day started. Ask any condemned man.
Episode 459. Welcome back.
Hello.
Welcome back to Misha Dianne Watch Santa Barbara.
Hello.
As always, sponsored by the Shineheart Wig Company. It is the last episode of the week. Friday, May 16th, 1986, right in the middle of sweeps, and this was a very action-packed episode for two of our storylines. But first, let's talk about last night's Knots Landing season finale, season 7. Mac could not find Karen. So, we'll see how that goes. And on Cheers, Sam proposed. But did he propose to Diane or Captain Janeway? We'll find out in September. And we got another season finale coming up tonight that we'll mention at the end. Back on daytime TV, Nick rings the doorbell looking for Kelly. But Kirk stops Brandon from answering it. And he tells Brandon he has a surprise for Brandon, but he has to be really quiet. Brandon wonders where Haley went. Kirk pretends to be Ted and calls the guard that was guarding Gina previously, but finds out only that Gina was moved, but he doesn't know where. Turns out he somehow figures it out between this and the next scene. At the boathouse, Gina tells Cece that the man with the rifle said he hated Eden, that she was cheating on him, and that he wanted her dead. So really, there's no one this could be but Kirk. Cece hears the car pulling in, so he runs up to get Cruz and Eden so that Gina can retell her story for them. But the phone rings, and it is Kirk. He has guessed that they have taken Gina down to the boathouse to jog her memory. And he puts Brandon on for a second, and Gina realizes Kirk has Brandon. He says, "Do you feel your memory returning?" So when Cruz and Eden arrive, Gina changes the story slightly. She says the man said that Eden was cheating him. And I guess she remembers that there was a blackmailer that has not been resolved yet. So she describes the man as 200 pounds with a beard, and that he had been blackmailing Eden and was not happy, I guess, with the payoff. Now, I think Kirk took the payoff, so I don't know how the blackmailer could say that he was being cheated if he theoretically got the money, but maybe I'm forgetting a second payment or something.
At any rate, everyone is very skeptical about the massive man with a big bushy beard.
But it does seem to me from this point on that Cece no longer thinks it's Kirk when they're back at the house. So I think definitely Cruz doesn't believe it. Eden, Eden of course has to reveal to Cece and Cruz about what this blackmail was all about, that it was regarding her pulling Cece's plug. And she confirms that the blackmail notes matched the note that lured her to the boathouse. And then privately Eden asks Gina if Kirk has threatened Brandon. But Gina takes the opportunity when there's a distraction to run out of the boathouse and get back to the Capwell house, because obviously she is really anxious for Brandon. Everyone follows her up there. First person she runs into is Mason, who says, "Oh, you really are alive." Cece tells her it's going to take some doing, but I'll get Brandon away from Cruz and Santana. So he sounds genuine here. Yeah,
he does sound genuine, and this is really going to put a crimp in things for Santana and Cruz. I think this is going to be a real issue of contention between Santana and Cruz, because Cruz's actions have kind of brought Cece into this and, have put her whole agreement around Brandon in danger. And I think it's going to put a real crimp on things between Cruz and CC, because this is not what CC promised Cruz.
Well, who should come around the corner but Brandon, shocked to find his mother is alive. And he says, this was a great surprise. So I think he's connecting it with the surprise Kirk told him that he had for him.
I think so.
In Brandon's mind, everything's still all cool with Uncle Kirk. Mason finds Haley unconscious in the kitchen. I guess, previously at one point, to get Brandon out of the room, Kirk had said, oh, maybe Haley's upstairs asleep, and sends her up there. But now we find he didn't bother to drag her up into her bed and make it look realistic. He just left her lying in the kitchen. So Cece and Mason go to attend to her, or leaving Kirk alone in the room with Gina. And he says, if you change your second story, they'll never believe your first story, or the other way around. So he thinks that she should stick with this blackmailer story, and hopefully there aren't too many cracks to smooth over in that. So Cruz asks Kirk for a description of the blackmailer, and Kirk says, I don't really remember. Now, I'm trying to think, was the guy that Kirk paid to beat him up, was that supposed to have been the blackmailer?
I thought that was the idea.
Yeah, so theoretically, if he and Gina had only gotten their story straight on the 200-pound bushy beard previously, then he could have just said that to Cruz, and it would have really cemented their alibi. And so, I was thinking at this point, oh, wow, this may be how Kirk gets to stay on the show without going to jail, because, he can live to needle everyone for another 3 months. Cruz says, I'm going to nail you anyway, man. And Kirk says, for what? So, could well be we get to keep Kirk. Brandon tells Gina he doesn't want to run away again. She takes him outdoors, and she says, no, we're not running away. She has the little tape in her hand, and she says, I know someone else who's going away for a long, long time. So now we see Gina is not just going to stick with this story. She, I think, decided it would be best if Kirk went to jail. And maybe him, threatening Brandon earlier was enough to put her over the edge.
And of course, the other thing that could easily get rid of Kirk is if his heart gives out.
That's true. That's always a nice wild card, or Deus Ex Machina that could end the story just as someone is about to be killed or shot or strangled. So they pop over to the Orient Express, and Gina calls Cruz and tells him to come there. So it seems like she will play the tape for him. Then she has a bit of a fantasy where she imagines the scenario of her playing the tape for Cruz, and then he arrests her anyway. And she thinks, he'd do it too. So I think she turns on a dime and changes her plan immediately. We have no idea what she's doing, but she asks Mark the maitre d' to watch Brandon. Mark the maitre d' is, of course, shocked to see that Mrs. Capwell is alive and racing out the door and giving him orders. So a really good, nice little addition for that, under 5 player who we've seen play Mark for the last month or so. We first, I think, really noted him because we thought it was kind of funny that he had the same name as Mark McCormick. They would add another Mark. But, that was good. He got that was very realistic, too. That would happen. So he watches Brandon for a while. Cruz arrives to find Brandon eating a sundae, and Brandon he says, "Oh, you really should have, checked with me or Cece." And he says, "Oh, well, Mom just told me to stay away from Uncle Kirk." So I think that probably more than anything really cements in Cruz's mind that Gina did have her memory back, and Kirk is the one the whole time. So that was actually kind of good.
And since she's been kind of going back and forth on her story a little bit, going one way and then leading in another direction, I think that might also give Cruz a clue that perhaps she is under threat by Kirk. Kirk tells Eden that he heard from Cece that the blackmailer is the
one that tried to kill her. Eden says, Eden's still non-committal on this and says it's all over now. And that she hopes Cruz catches him, whoever he is. Kirk says, I can't bear the way things are between us. And Eden says, you won't have to feel that way for long. So I think Eden is 100% thinking it is Kirk.
Yeah.
Later, we see Eden is at a payphone on the road somewhere. And she calls Cruz and says, are you going to that place that we arranged? And she says, yes. And he says, are you sure Kirk doesn't know where you're going? So this is interesting. And I noticed a couple of spoilers accidentally in the episode titles. So I know where this is going, and I vaguely remember it. But it's a little bit similar to some other TV shows we've watched. So I may be remembering something I didn't actually witness. But anyway, it's going to be a fun location that we're going to see in the next little while.
And of course, whenever you have these kind of conversations on the phone, you do somewhat expect someone has picked up, the extension and will know right away.
Well, at least she called from a payphone, but I really feel like, we'll next see that Kirk actually was following her the whole time, or that he's put a tracker on her car. I mean, he had all that other equipment for bugging the place, so maybe he's got trackers on everyone's car too, just to help them out. So Cruz says, so when she says Kirk doesn't know where she's going, Cruz says, then you'll be safe. And Eden says, will I? And I think that was just a way to give it a little Friday cliffhanger tweak for that storyline. But
she's right, because it's
she's right, exactly. Kirk will figure it out. The most boring of the three stories from this episode is, of course, Mary and Mason. Mary goes back to Mother Isabel to tell her what's been going on. Mark accuses Mason of sleeping with Mary and punches him in the mouth. And then Mary arrives from the convent and goes to the guest house with Mark. So their adventure may ramp up on Monday, this episode. But there's no time for them this episode because we see the camera that Cruz set up to record Gina is still, there's no light on it, but it's still aimed into the Capwell presidential suite with the mirrored window. And we're kind of wondering, is it still recording after all this time? How long is the tape in there? Kelly's been in there for hours.
Yeah, remember this is before digital, internet. So they're confined to the length of time that is actually physically on the cassette tape.
But every time we see Kelly in this room, they always show us at least one shot of the camera there. So there must be a reason for that.
I feel like this will play a big role if Dylan takes off somewhere with Kelly and they're trying to figure out what's going on or whatever. I feel like this will play a role.
The only thing I thought of, what if it's one of those, how you can have voice-activated tape recorders, right?
Yeah.
That only come on when there's sound. Maybe to save tape, the camera only comes on when there's sound. And it could be realistic that they could spot, something even after it's been running for a day or so. Well, we'll see what's on that tape eventually. Upstairs, Dylan solves the last clue. And then he spots Justin at the Orient Express and accuses him of secretly practicing psychiatry on Kelly. And just in the nick of time, he discovers that Nick knew. So this is all coming together for him so that he can throw that in Kelly's face. He tells Justin that you and Nick worked together to cheat me out of Kelly. So, after this encounter, Justin goes to Nick and says that Dylan is exhibiting textbook paranoid behavior. And Nick says, and look what he did to this picture of Kelly. And he has a gun. Justin is not too happy when he hears all this. I think he's extremely worried now about Dylan. Kelly opens the door to find not Nick, but Dylan standing in the doorway.
What a bummer for anyone.
He calls Nick's place and talks to Justin briefly and then gives Nick the first clue of his scavenger hunt. And Kelly is annoyed to see he has all 4 clues in his hand, that he was the one who followed the scavenger hunt. Dylan opens the champagne and tells Kelly that Justin is a psychiatrist and that he and Nick have been messing with her mind. Kelly, seems very stunned by this information while Dylan is relating it, but then she says, I can understand why they kept that from me. Yeah. That Justin helped her a lot. She says, I've totally forgotten Peter now. And we haven't seen Peter in like 2 weeks, so...
She also says something, maybe you've got this in your notes, about, they were trying to help me. That's what real friends do. That's what people do when they care about each other. So it's kind of interesting, this whole build-up to, what will happen when Kelly finds out that Justin is a psychiatrist and Nick was in on it. It kind of fizzles out.
Now, maybe afterwards she'll...
Yeah, I think in the aftermath, it
Justin
might
as
play
much,
out.
possibly. Dylan says, no, they brainwashed you. I'm trying to help you get rid of Nick. Now, this is starting to get ominous. Nick arrives at the boathouse, and Dylan has Kelly call him. And he's like, Kelly, don't let Dylan in there. He's got a gun. But... of course, Dylan has already taken the phone back from Kelly, so she never hears that warning. And Dylan gives Nick the next clue, which, of course, will lead him to the Capwell atrium. Dylan tells Kelly, I'm going to see this through to the end. I'm a born kamikaze, a suicide bomber. So this makes me think, is it Dylan, Nick, and Kelly all doomed? Or, as Kelly is one of the stars, is only Nick and Dylan doomed? Similar to the way Joe and Peter were doomed in the last cycle of Kelly's life.
Yeah, I feel like it might end with them both getting shot. One of those classic things where they're wrestling with a gun and both people end up being shot. I'm still holding out hope that the casino is going to be involved in this somehow.
Dylan says, if you hadn't met Nick, do you think you would have loved me? And she says, I wouldn't have met you either if I hadn't met Nick.
Yeah.
And then Dylan pulls out his gun and says, how about if Nick was dead? Would you love me then? So that is our big cliffhanger for the week. And Monday is May 19th. Which is only one day earlier than May the 20th, which a mere 1 year ago, May 20th, Kelly was in the elevator death trap that Marcello Armonti had set for Cece. And so, depending on how long this day lasts, May the 20th may once again be a very traumatizing day for Kelly Capwell. Anything else you wanted to say about this week? Or
no, not really. It's
just
really entertaining to see all these 3 psycho men kind of coming together, crossing paths. I'm sure we'll be adding Mark to the mix next week.
I really feel like the Dylan one's going to be the one that gets resolved first. And then, Mark, they've sort of slowed it down this week. But then we've got Eden hiding out in some mysterious location next week. Maybe she'll be there for a few days before Kirk figures it out. Or maybe that'll just, ramp up immediately. But we've still got 2 weeks left in the sweep, so I think it's going to be exciting May 1986. And tonight, I'm very excited. I put on my cowboy hat, my cowboy boots. It's the Season 9 finale of Dallas will be tonight. And looking forward to Pam and Mark getting married. Hopefully JR won't figure out a way to thwart that. And
I never watched Dallas, so I don't know.
I can be slightly more spoilery with these. I don't want to spoil any Knots Landing or Falcon Crest for you, because we're still a year or two behind in our viewing. But we'll catch up, because we watch it 52 weeks a year. So we'll be at 1986 pretty soon on Knots Landing. That is it for week 94. I'll try and dig up some more Expo stuff for next week, some inside info. Maybe get an interview with an actual Expo employee, although when I checked in with him, he was in Maui, so I thought I'd better wait for him to get back from his vacation. We'll see what else is going on in the world if Chernobyl radiation doesn't drift over here and kill us all. So we'll be back when we've watched episode 460 for week 95 of Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
Hi-O Silver away. They love it when you speak their language.
Mother Isabel, I'm not sure I can pass up an exit like this.
Don't send for my things. You'd better make sure they let you receive packages in the psychiatric ward.
Who was that man?
He didn't leave a silver bullet.